Hey, it's Jay. Welcome back to Tears of the Kingdom. Today I've got a little bit of if my fucking thing will work. Come on, work with me. Um, Today I've got something different planned. I'm going to do something that I sort of suggested that I might do, kind of promised that I would do um, early on in the playthrough, like halfway through the playthrough. We're going to take a nice little ride on the Light Dragon and kind of see the Light Dragon's path. Now, the problem is that the Light Dragon apparently takes around 2 hours or something like that to complete her full loop of Hyrule. So in order to fill the time, I have gone ahead and I have written a little review for the game. Actually, I'll go ahead and we'll get rid of Tulin here too. We'll make this nice and chill. Sorry, I'm in the Snow Quill set. It's just she does fly through cold damage areas. But I did go over this. I finished this review back when I finished the last stream, but I haven't really had a time to really sit down and ride on the Light Dragon until now. It looks like it's only going to be about an hour to go through this, but I don't know. Maybe speaking out loud, it's going to be slower than me reading and editing it. But I think this is probably going to take about an hour. So if we're close to the end of the Light Dragon's path, I'll come up with some other bullshit to discuss as we continue playing. Otherwise, we'll just end when I'm done with my review here. So I got my script. Bear with me here. I'm sure I'm going to flub some of these deliveries. We'll start with some of the more objective improvements and flaws, and then I will move my way on to my more subjective opinions. So I think we'll start off with the core game experience, as I think about every flaw with the original game was addressed and improved. First and foremost is rain. Rain was super annoying in the original game, as so much exploration involved climbing mountains and cliffs. But with the rain, you would slip right off. The only real counter to this was to sleep at a campfire to skip time, but you can't light a campfire in the rain. Now there are caves all over to hide a fire in, or you could now there are caves all over to hide a fire in, or you could use Ultra Brand to build a cover over your fire. But more importantly, the game is the Froggy set and the slip elixirs that completely negate slipping in the rain. Next up is combat. Combat in the original game was actually rather annoying, largely due to weapon durability. The game attempted to add difficulty scaling by simply creating enemies with higher health pools, but this didn't actually make them that much harder to fight. It just made the game more grindy, the fight more grindy, especially in the late game. It would make it so that you'd break 2 or 3 weapons, clearing out just one monster camp, only for the chest reward to be a weapon that was worse than whatever you spent on the fight. In the early game, there's also the problem of hoarding your good weapons. Since you never knew where you could get a decent replacement, you save anything that could actually deal damage for bosses and mini bosses, and then use the shitty and crap weapons on the rare occasion you took on regular enemies. Fuse fixed both of these issues. A part of the problem with weapon durability is, yeah, you could get a decent weapon by killing a silver boko or the like, but since you could hold a limited amount of weapons, you'd often have an inventory of weapons clearing out one camp that actually had good weapons, and then break a ton of those weapons in one fight at another camp with shit rewards. But higher tier monsters in this game have have horns with higher attack damage, and those monster horns can actually stack. Now silver bokos are actually worth going after because you can bump one silver horn up to 3 or 4, for an example. Doesn't matter if your weapon stash is full, killing a high tier enemy now guarantees a decent weapon for later. I have heard some people complain that the weapons in this game in general have a too low attack power compared to the original, but even a mid-tier monster horn makes them as strong as some of Breath of the Wild's late game weapons, so I don't think that that's a fair comparison. I didn't use this much, but you could also destroy your fuse and swap between hammers and axes or fire and ice weapons on the fly, and not use up an extra inventory slot on them. And of course, both fusing to arrows and just flat out throwing shit has improved ranged combat. Although it's got to be said, the actual menu for throwing and fusing on arrows is atrocious. Sure, the most used kind of helps, but I'd like a proper favorites option. So stuff that I rarely use but is useful, like Fire Key's Eyes, is accessible, while stuff that I never use, like Wood, just isn't there. But Fuse wasn't the only improvement. You can now bring friends into a fight. Between things like sages, the monster control crew, homing Zonai devices, traps made of Zonai devices, muddle buds. There's a lot of ways to deal damages to enemies indirectly. These things often have two main benefits. First off, is that they massively save durability on your weapons, so that's great. But second is that they make fights into full battlefields. You hit a blue moblin. The blue moblin swings at your head. Tulin gets a headshot on the blue moblin. Mineru knocks a black boko over to you. You swat the black boko back. It just creates this nice flow of action that feels awesome and makes things feel much larger scale than they actually are. Alternatively, you could just sit back and let these extra damage sources do all the fighting for you. And it's so funny watching a boss Boko turn on his own troops and just swap them all away in one swing. It's awesome. A more minor thing that was improved was the Yiga. Yiga ambushes in the original game got so damn annoying. Because of how they were coded, basically, anytime you reached a main road or path, they just randomly attack you. And the ambushes stopped being fun almost immediately. I have no idea what they changed in the background, but Yiga ambushes are so much more varied and a lot less frequent, which makes them way more fun. Also, you could negate them with the Yiga set if you wanted to. If there's any mechanic from the original game that wasn't improved, it's horses. Horses were already pretty shit in Breath of the Wild. You could only summon horses at stables, and you couldn't whistle to call them from very far away. But the world was so broken up by rivers and hills and mountains that you couldn't actually ride to that many places on the horses. The DLCs improved this with both the Ancient Horse Armor and the Master Cycle, allowing you to summon them anywhere for a quick burst of speed. You'd think the Master Cycle would outclass horses in any instance, but the fact that it needed fuel and had a worse turning circle still gave horses their purpose. Fast forward to Tears of the Kingdom, and horses got even worse. They added a mechanic to upgrade your horse at stables, but those upgrades were so expensive that they were never worth it. Horses can't even be used in the sky or the depths, so they explored even less of the map in the long run. But most damning for them is the Zonai devices. Especially with auto build, you can just build a car or plane anywhere you want to, and get somewhere way faster than a horse ever could. The harness was a cool idea, but you could also just slap something on the back of your Zonai car. So just about every mechanic from Breath of the Wild got better, making the core game experience more enjoyable. But then there are the new mechanics and gameplay elements. And we'll start out with the good ones. First off is caves and wells. I love the caves, and they add so much added experience to the Hyrule we're familiar with. While the wells are certainly more boring, each cave system has such an interesting and different layout. Some of them are just one chamber, others are complex networks of countless tunnels, some warp in and around each other. And some wrap in and around and over themselves, while others are straight stretches into the earth. Many of them serve as thoroughfares, providing another method to traverse the land other than slowly climbing up mountains. As mentioned before, they combat bad weather, like the rain. Some you fall into from a sinkhole of sand, some you have to climb up with scaffolds, some flood and drain, some are guarded by griots. They're great. I remember reading somewhere that Minecraft was one of the main inspirations for Breath of the Wild, but it wasn't super feeling in that game. I wasn't super feeling it in that game. These new caves have captured Minecraft's feeling of spelunking spectacularly. The only real gripe I've got with caves is that visually they get repetitive. And most of the time, they're the same brown, dirty walls. They've all got the same moss texturing. The only things to collect in them are bright blooms, glow claps, and glow crabs, glow caps. I always mess it up. And glowing fish. Monster variety is a tad better. 90% of the time, it's just horriblins and likes, which get boring fast. But every so often, you'll find a Talos or Stalnox or a Boss Boko in their crew. Uh, this all makes it so that mechanically, the caves are basically the same. But exploration wise, they are incredibly varied from one another. Oh, pretty perfect timing there. Uh, approaching Death Mountain. Death Mountain's pretty cool. The only real gripe that I've got with caves is that they. Or sorry, I was reading the Mark Cross script. One thing that can be a bit hit or miss, but one thing that can be a bit hit or miss, but generally hits, are Ultra Hand and Zona devices. Now, I think I robbed myself of the experience here a bit. Since I was trying to beat the game in 2 or 3 months, and I was live streaming my experience, I never took the time to really experiment with making new machines with Ultra Hand. But if you put in the time, you can get some awesome builds. The main pro of Zonai devices is that they add basically infinite potential to the game. You can make a killer lightning robot, a speedy hover bike, an orbital an orbital bombardment platform, a quark crucifixion device, a boat, whatever the hell you want to do. There's got to be a way to pull it off. We can actually see Dinwell coming up here. That's pretty cool. It's nice when the dragons pass each other. The main con is the awkward nature of its cost. With auto build, you can just spend 3 Zonite for each part of your machine, and you get a shit ton of Zonite from the debts. So that's an excellent way to gather all the auto builds you need. What gets a little bit more awkward is the devices you hold in your pocket. In order to get these, you have to find a camp of constructs, kill them for charges and horns, locate a gumball machine from the device for the device you want, or with the device you want, and then just pray that RNG gives you a good roll and gives you enough of them, which is much more tedious and complex of a process than just using Zonite. Late game, you can trade crystallized charges for the specific device that you want, but even still, 90% of the time, it's just easier to spend the Zonite on auto build and not throw out any of the devices from your pocket. That's not to say that the devices in your inventory are useless. You have to build something with Ultra Hand in order to auto build it in the first place, and there are going to be plenty of times you just need 1 or 2 devices for a puzzle in the overworld, ignoring any auto building. Using devices from the environment or your pocket also lets you take your auto build apart to recycle it for something new. It's just odd that your first method of getting things runs through so many hoops and is suggested to be the intended method when despite such a cheap alternative being also available very early on at around the same time. That's just a little bit odd to me. But one thing you'll notice about those 2 good new mechanics is that one is exclusive to the surface and the other can affect the surface, which leads me to the bad new mechanics. The sky and the depths are boring. Now the thing is, the name Tears of the Kingdom is actually a bit of a pun. On the one hand, it refers to the literal dragon tears made by the princess of the kingdom, but it also calls to the fact that the world has 3 tiers to explore now, and those extra tiers don't add a lot. They are repetitive to explore on their own and don't interface with the main surface that much. We'll start with the sky, because it's the worst. The thing about the sky is that there really isn't that much available in it. The Great Sky Island, Rising Island Chain, Wellspring Island, and Thunderhead Isles are all pretty unique and cool, but they're also all just parts of the main story. So, of course they are. You got the 3 dive challenges, but these all have the same island copy and pasted for the top and bottom, and similar copy pasted ruins for the course of the dive. There's the labyrinths, but they're the same layout as the versions from the original game on the surface. IMO, there are only 3 properly unique islands in the sky. Zonite Forge Island, which is the tower that you have to glide around on the gusts of wind. Starview Island, which is the big ball with the mirror light puzzle. And Lightcast Island, which is the cave system with the light puzzle. Each of these have unique layouts and puzzles to solve, looking and playing different than any other Sky Island. Yet they still have their issues. Despite how massive each of them is, each one only really adds 1 puzzle to complete. In addition, 2 of them are mirror light puzzles. You could have halved or made these islands a third of their size and still have the same effect. Every other Sky Island is so homogeneous. You got your central island with the rotating launching pillar and the gumball machine. You got the round area with the flux construct. And you got a random assortment of random broken Zonai huts. And they all look and play the exact fucking same. Despite how linear it is, the Great Sky Island is still cool. You've got unique environmental details, layered islands that wrap in and above and around each other, construct NPCs with custom dialogue. It feels like an explorable land, and it sets an unfair first impression for the rest of the sky. It only gets worse from then on, with so much simplicity and blandness that feel more like points on a checklist than lands to explore. Also, this is going to be talked about way later, but traveling the sky is also a bit of a pain with how flying vehicles work. But for what's relevant here, most traversal of the sky involves traveling on the surface and then just launching up to your desired location. You don't actually traverse the sky on its own all that much. That brings us to the depths, which are better, but not perfect. When first exploring the depths, it's such a surreal and frightening experience. It's just you in total darkness, surrounded by patches of floor that can kill you. You have no idea when you're about to step over a massive ravine into nothingness. Each time you reach a cliff, you have no idea how high it stretches into the heavens. Is this a wall? How far across is this lake? What was that noise? Is a monster after me? Oh, thank God, a supply stash. I can fix my car. And it's just another horrifying push through the dark to that next light route, that next beacon of hope and healing. But light routes are where the first issue arises. The main point of the depths, from a completionist's perspective, is to light up all of the right light routes. But doing so completely kills the depth's main draw. When lit up, the depths become far too easy to traverse, and things like bright blooms are entirely negated and become pointless as a mechanic. The horror is lost because you can see too much. Being able to see too much also makes it obvious how little unique content there is in the depths. For the main story, you've got the Koga Mines, Garandia, and the final fight. You've got kind of the cool but copy-paste of content like the Colosseums and the Bargainer statues. Are you back? I don't think she's back yet. She's not back yet. Okay, we got a little bit more. I didn't think she was quite healed. Or are we already... Okay, so this is when she turns around to go over Central Hyrule. I thought that was going to be much later. I thought she did that when she was over Tabantha. That explains how I lost her so many times. Biome-wise, the only unique thing is the volcanic region under Death Mountain. Structure-wise, there's a decent amount. There's the 2 peninsulas, the Gliok Cave, the ancient underground fortress, the observation deck, the underground cemetery, the Bloopy Burrow, and the secret spring of revival. Problem is, all of these locations have parallels on the surface. 2 peninsulas, Typhlo Ruins, Akala Citadel, Tuft Mountains. or rather Talith Mountain's Heart Lake, Arbiter's Grounds, Satori Mountain, the Shrine of Resurrection. All these locations are all much more different and interesting than each other, debatably in the Arbiter's case, than their depths counterparts. But there's also lots of cool or notable locations on the surface that have no depths counterpart and are more or less side quests or questless. Selmy Spot, the Seven Heroines, North Gerudo Ruins, the Ape Heroine, Lanuru Promenade, East Reservoir, the Thunder Plateau. Granted, a few of these are in lakes, which aren't covered in the depths, but you get my point. The only non-hostile wildlife are stall horses, which you can find on the surface, and depths fireflies. The only foods, if you will, are bomb flowers, muddle buds, and puff shrooms. It's all very samey. It's got like one biome, the size of the entire map. I think the depth's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. The entire thing is a sort of inverted parallel of the surface. Every mountain is a canyon. Every canyon is a mountain. Bodies of water are sheer rock walls. Linos are under every stable. Groves under every forest, etc. On the one hand, that's super cool. And it really hits home the sense of mystique and unnaturalness of the whole place. On the other hand, once you realize that, it trivializes the exploration. It makes it so that it makes it so that fully mapping the depths isn't super satisfying, as it's the same map you've been staring at for 6 years now. It's just purple. All of this culminates to make it so that the depths are super fun at first, but once you finish the map, or even before that, it stops becoming fun whatsoever. Now, with all that said, it's worth noting that Breath of the Wild had a very similar flaw. A lot of people jokingly called it Breath of the Empty, as there were like the Skull Monster Camp, the Campfire Monster Camp, the Wooden House Ruin, and the Stone Building Ruin. And those 4 places were just copy-pasted all over the map. But at the very least, these repetitive locations were put in distinct environments. The Tau Bab may have had nothing to do in it, but at least it had this new yellowish color of grass and baobab trees. Thunder Plateau was basically just one shrine quest, but had these cool mushroom trees and covered in switch violets. Faerun could be entirely ignored for the main story, but going there you'd find the Zonai ruins and new tropical trees and hordes of mighty bananas to harvest. Akala is pretty and autonomous. South Tabantha is craggy and rugged. North Tabantha is snowy and open. Each corner of the map felt visually distinct and had unique resources to recover. When every corner of the depths is just purple, with the same 3 trees and only Zonite and 3 flowers to collect, it gets old fast. Why explore when you're gonna get everything, when everything you're gonna get is right there? I think that scale has a big part in that. I loved the caves while I hated the depths. And I think the main reason for that is that each cave is a custom, handcrafted, unique experience. While the depths are attempting to cover the same amount of space as the surface, while barely having enough content to justify a third of that. I think that if the depths were a handful of large, cavernous chambers linked by thin tunnels, like what they did for the Tingle Islands, and had a layout completely different than the surface, it could feel a lot fuller and more interesting. She was recharged a little bit of a while ago, but I kind of got invested there. Speaking of repetitive, you got the story. Now, this is a Nintendo game. We all knew going in that the story was going to cover pretty similar ground to the original, and the gameplay loop was going to be pretty similar as well. But even then, it felt disappointing. The only truly awesome or cool bit was the ending, especially the grabbing Zelda's hand bit felt awesome and climactic and epic and one of the best endings I've seen in any video game. Perhaps only second to Portal 2. But the journey to get there isn't nearly as cool. There was an ancient race with advanced there was an ancient race with advanced technology. Whoa! I have to help the descendants of past heroes of each tribe. How interesting. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's nice to have a sense of familiarity, and changing the story too much would disrupt the gameplay loop and make this feel like less of a sequel. Which brings us to the bigger issue. Is this a sequel? So much of the story feels so disconnected from what happened in Breath of the Wild. The first issue is character interactions. Outside of the main story characters, the only people that seem to recognize Link are Hudson and Ronson. Granted, I can see you forgetting the person who helped you catch 10 crickets 6 years ago, but would you really forget the flying Hylian that helped you make your breakthrough on gliding technology? Now, why Nintendo did this is obvious. There is a lot of people who would have skipped Breath of the Wild and just played the sequel, who would be confused if thrust into a bunch of callbacks. In addition, not everyone who played Breath of the Wild would have done all of those side quests and talked to all of those NPCs. Even still, we know this game has the ability to read your Breath of the Wild save file. It can recover your horses and remember your champion's ballad photo. The people at Nintendo bothered putting custom dialogues in if you talk to someone in the rain or while naked. So how hard would it be to throw in a check for Pellison to tell you thanks for recruiting him and what happened to his brother? Or for the shitty cooking girl to say, hey, it's you, my cooking skills have improved, or something to that effect. A second issue that I have, which is probably the more major one, is what the fuck happened to all the Sheikah tech? I've seen lots of fan theories that they were salvaged and dismantled or they dissolve, but it would be nice for some sort of in-game addressing of the topic. I could see them cleaning up all of the Guardians in Akala and Ateno, but what about the ruined temple and the Lomai Island maze? I could see them tearing down the Skyview towers, but what happened to the Shrine of Resurrection? And it's not like the timeline was altered. The calamity still happened. Impa mentions it. Guardians still existed. Purah kept the one in her lab. The divine beasts still existed. The Rito mentioned Va Meadow's perch. But we, the player, are never given an answer as to where the 4 giant automatons that could be seen from across the entire map had disappeared to. And it may be a minor point, but I'm going to complain anyway. Where the hell is Cass? Every other character with a unique model and main story relevance for Breath of the Wild returned in this game. Assuming they weren't, dead. Plenty of minor background dudes like the Blood Moon guy or the shield sledding enthusiasts returned. But then you got Cass, an entirely unique Rito design, who had like 12 side quests, who is the main focus of the gigantic second DLC, and is widely regarded as one of, if not the best characters in the entire game. And he's not here? All he gets is a brief shout-out and a nod from Penn? Initially, I thought they were saving him for the DLC, but based on that one potentially misquoted developer interview, it seems like we aren't going to get any DLC. So, long story short, I think that the core gaming experience of this game is a lot better than Breath of the Wild. But when looking at the game as a whole, a lot of the added content feels half-baked and poorly implemented. The depths and the skies just feel unfinished. And so it's really hard for me to decide which one is the better game. I know there's been a lot of debate about that. And so you have the question of, okay, as a 100% completionist, do I have to look at the main bulk of my playthrough or the full thing? How am I going to rate that? And I'm not really sure. I haven't decided. But that's everything I think has objectively changed about the game. So let's get into some more of my subjective opinions, mostly focusing on what bits I thought were better or worse. We'll start with the dungeons. And I think that my opinions on them are going to depend on semantics. For example, if you consider the underground waterworks, Wellspring Isles, and the Water Temple to all be the water dungeon, then yeah, it's better than Varuda. But if we're just comparing the actual water temple, the Divine Beast takes the cake. That's not going out right. Hold on. Just like mucus in the back of my nose. It's bugging me. But yeah, the Divine Beasts take the cake. The Divine Beasts were such a cool concept. I joked about Shadow of the Colossus around them a lot, but the idea of scaling a gigantic monster in order to warm through a dungeon inside of it is so inspired and unique. The ability to change and move the dungeons into new poses added an interesting dynamic element that you don't often see in gaming, and it was so fun. They just felt larger than life. To be fair, I can't think of any situations where the sequel could have lived up to this. If they had just four more divine beasts, you'd question where the hell they were in the first game. If they came up with a new style of giant monster with a dungeon inside of it, it would just feel repetitive of the original, even more so than they are now. It is a lose-lose situation. The original game was so inspired that nothing could compare to it. So I do prefer the Divine Beasts over the actual temples, but I think having an additional dungeon or two before you get to the temple does drastically improve the experience. It makes it much more in line with what you would expect out of a Zelda game. But where these temples really shine are their bosses. Now, I've always said that the Blights were overhated. I've always said that the Blights were overhated and weren't as bad as people made them out to be. But there's no doubt that having four nearly identical monsters with nearly identical boss themes and just slightly different attack patterns got old. Every boss in this game is so varied and interesting with completely unique ways of fighting them and often multiple ways to deal damage. Colgera is inspired with a perfect battle theme and one of the most cinematic things in Zelda history. Goma can be fought with Rewind and Ascension, or Bullet Time, or with Yanobo. Queen Gibdo is an all-out war and can get grindy without Reju, but is hard in a fun way, unlike Thunderblight's hard in an annoying way. Muckrock is hilarious and doofy and silly and is annoying, but in a fun way. Koga has 4 separate fights instead of just one, and they're all as delightful and hilarious as the original. The only boss that really falls behind in this game might be Deceased Construct, which feels a tad clunky, but at least it was a unique concept and a badass design, so it's got something. Oh shit, there's actual enemies. I don't even have my shield. That's not good. I was expecting to be attacked during this. Hold on. Oh, there's another one. Are your horns back? You look like you're going a bit. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't think there was any Aracudas in Light Dragon's path. I thought that would have been something that the game would have avoided doing. But apparently not. Where was I? I was in the bosses. Oh yeah, the Seas Construct, which is a tad clunky, but it was a unique and badass design. Now, Maz Kashia is still probably my favorite fight of both games, but he's DLC. It doesn't count. I already said I love the original Koga fight. So, what are the blights? Water Blight was pretty fun. Having an enemy with such massive range that melee combat was near impossible in Phase 1 is cool. And having it hang off the ceiling and needing to shoot it down in Phase 2 is also cool. Thunder Blight was awful. Combining having to parry or dodge with an extra fast enemy that makes you drop your weapons is horrendous. Especially because by the time you manage to recover your weapons, he is already swooping in for another attack, and it's too late to lock on and dodge or parry again. Wind Blight and Fire Blight are both just kind of whatever. Wind Blight is just bland, and Fire's invincibility shield you have to bomb is awesome, but he only does it once as he transitions to Phase 2, which makes it so forgettable. But that leads me to what might be my most controversial opinion. Calamity Ganon is a better final boss than Ganondorf. Now, hear me out here. We'll start with why I don't like Ganondorf. Playing through the main story of Tears of the Kingdom, you have to fight Phantom Ganon in the belly of the Great Deku Tree and in the Sanctum of Hyrule Castle. Among the many optional Phantom Ganons, there is one directly in the path to Ganondorf that you're probably going to take the time to kill on a first playthrough. All three of Ganondorf's phases are essentially just Phantom Ganon, but slightly harder. Now, he does throw in new mechanics. He'll swap between all three weapons, while the Phantoms usually just use one. He'll permanently steal your hearts, which is an awesome mechanic that really puts a timer on the fight. He can flurry rush you, which is a really unique idea for an enemy, but ultimately is more annoying than fun. Even with all of that, the essence of his attack patterns and design is still just Phantom Ganon, meaning that most likely landing that final blow is effectively going to be the 6th time that you've killed Phantom Ganon. And it's boring by that point. I hate Ganondorf for the same reason that most people hate the Blights. I've seen it before. Compare that to Calamity Ganon. Keep in mind, I avoided spoilers for Breath of the Wild for 6 whole years. Calamity Ganon is fucking insane. A freaky, mangled mess of loose guardian limbs and weapons, with a realistic and disgusting skull for a face, sealed inside a beating heart on the roof of the ceiling. He carries weapons for each of the Blight's most iconic attacks, and throws in his own attacks and movements to keep the player on their toes. He's an abomination that pays tribute to everything that you've done in the game so far, and freaks you out because there's no way something like this should be allowed in a Nintendo game. He felt fresh and interesting and alien, as opposed to the 4th time that 3D Zelda did Ganondorf, and the 6th time that you've killed him in just this game alone. The one thing I'll concede about Calamity Ganon is, yeah, he's pretty easy. If you do all of the main quests, he'll lose half of his entire health bar before the fight even begins. People thought that trivialized the fight. But I'll counter that with, at least recruiting the champions did something. Thanks to Demon Army and 3 Ganondorf phases, there are 4 mandatory fights in talk, as opposed to just Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, which I guess you could argue still kind of counts as 2, but those 2 also have half health compared to the 2 that you normally get. So it's still effectively just 1. But yeah, 4 mandatory fights in talk as opposed to just Calamity Ganon and Breath of the Wild, which already massively lengthens the fight. Despite that, the sages only attack Ganondorf during Phase 2, and even then barely contribute anything to the fight. Calamity Ganon felt like you assembled a crew to take on a great evil, or take on the great evil, while Ganondorf felt like you recruited all of the heroes for nothing, and they won't help you fight the final boss, and you aren't allowed to use their powers against him. Despite how much this game seems to be championing teamwork more than the champions were done in the original, I don't think that it landed as well because they're not really helping you at the end of things. Personally, I'd rather the 6-character boss rush still be necessary, but you get to use all 6 sages, or all 5 sages rather, throughout the entire Ganondorf fight. I think that that's a fair trade of difficulty versus intrigue of the situation. Now, all that said, yeah, Demon Dragon is way better than Dark Beast. It is no contest whatsoever. And with the main bosses out of the way, let's address mini bosses. I think Tears of the Kingdom falls into the same pit that Breath of the Wild did. That there are way too many mini boss encounters and not enough actual mini bosses. Talos stopped being fun to kill after the 15th to 20th or so fight. Despite that, Breath of the Wild had 40 of them, and Tears of the Kingdom bumped things up to 87. The only mini boss I really liked in Breath of the Wild was Molduga, because only 4 fights plus the king was enough to get to learn their patterns without things getting stale. I might actually go ahead and turn off my Sheikah sensor real quick. oops, I forgot I still had that on. But yeah, Molduga was the only one I super enjoyed from the original. Tears of the Kingdom's introduction of 2 whole new layers with only 3 new mini bosses exacerbated this issue. But without the bosses, but what about the bosses themselves? Frogs are kind of cool, but once again, I feel like there are too many of them. The thing I love about them is that they kind of feel like a tribute to all of the original game's mini bosses. You have to hit it in the eye to stun it, like a Hinox, and then strike the stones on its back, like a Talos. And while this might not be as obvious or intentional, it's a huge beast with a giant mouth that tries to sneak up on and eat you just like a Molduga, both of whom can be fed bombs to stop them. Appreciate the Zonite, though. Zonite's pretty cool. They're a great source of it, especially with their little nests. The Flux Constructs are a lot more enjoyable, largely due to how many ways there are to fight them. You can shoot them with arrows, fuse parts to your weapons and then destroy them, glue their bodies together with Ultra Hand, rewind their parts to tear them apart and climb them, or use Ascend to reach them. They just kind of let you go hog wild with your arm's abilities, and that's awesome. Something that I never really tried, but I'm starting to wonder whether or not it could be possible, is if you used Ultra Hand to tear the cubes off of a Flux Construct, and then actually glued them together to make a build, and then used Auto Build, could Auto Build pull enough cubes apart in one go? I don't know if you could do that. That sounds interesting. I'd like to see someone try that, because that sounds like a fun thing to do. The Gleeoks are also great. Similar to Lynels, they're a ridiculously hard enemy that you can slowly learn the patterns of until you wipe the floor with them. Having different elemental combinations is a much more fun way of adding difficulty rather than just inflating the health bar. They are absolutely disgusting and hideous with the Cyclops eye and the beard of spikes. I'm also a sucker for their cowardness, attempting to fly away out of your reach only to get knocked out of the sky and take fall damage. Doesn't matter if you're using rocket shields or long distance bows or key size, if you slack for even a moment, all three heads elemental attacks will just devastate you. That King Gleok in the depths is terrifying. The biggest gripe I can give the Gleoks is their distribution. There are 4 fire, but only 3 ice and thunder? Why not 3 of each? How come it's only King Gleoks in the sky and the depths, when you could have a king and all 3 elements in both the sky and the depths? How come the depths King Gleok, the hardest of them to fight, only gives you a random ass amiibo hat instead of something more badass like the Zant Helm or a strong unique sword? Their health pool is also a tad ridiculous. Lionels don't consume durability when you're on their backs, but the Gleok has no equivalent mechanic, meaning that you're guaranteed to break 2 or 3 of your best weapons on just one of them. All that said, Gleoks are a valiant counterpart to the Lionel. And with only 14 encounters divided among 4 types, they didn't get nearly as stale as things like the Hinox and the Talos did. On a personal note, though, one thing I noticed this playthrough is that I've definitely gotten braver towards mini bosses than in Breath of the Wild. In the previous game, I run or stealth away from any encounter until pretty late in the game. This time, sans the Gleok, I usually rush towards every Hinox and Talos and whatnot to give it a shot. I even took on a Lionel with, like, 4 hearts. I had my ass handed to me, but I tried, and I would have never had the balls for that before. Since there's no better place to talk about it, I'd like to discuss a very personal issue. I miss Guardians. I'm a much bigger fan, both style-wise and gameplay-wise, of the Guardians than I am Constructs. The Ancient Sheikah tech just looks so cool to me, while the Zonite tech looks so boring. Now, to be fair, Sheikah tech was based on a certain ancient era of Japan, while Zonite tech, I believe, was based on Aztec designs. So someone who lives in America, the Sheikah architecture machines just felt more unknown and ancient to me. Though that could be a cultural thing, I could see someone from Japan having the exact opposite opinion. Um, these swirly patterns, mechanical movements, and the satisfaction of tearing off their legs just made the Guardians so cool. They felt more fun fighting than they made more fun and frightening to fight than the Constructs. And while they might not be as scary, they were a more enjoyable duel than the Gloomhands and Phantom Ganon. I want them back. They're so iconic. They can never be replaced. So next, let's compare the runes and hand abilities. I'll try to line these up by rough function. Ultra Hand is just a better version of Magnesis. You can't use it to swing things with quite the same velocity to kill enemies, which is a bummer, but being able to pick up way more types of materials, plus fusing them together, is more than a fair trade-off. An odd comparison, but I'd argue that Cryonis and Ascend are equivalents. And there's no contest. Ascend might just be the most fun and enjoyable ability in the entire game. I know it may not seem much, but being able to instantly climb massive structures for paragliding or bullet time, or for entering secret rooms, was such a delight. I even raised my arm up IRL when I need to go upstairs, just expecting to magically phase through the ceiling a few times. It feels like you're cheating or hacking the game, but it is an entirely intended mechanic, and it works so fun. Stasis and Recall is where we get into more of a debate. Recall is pretty cool, being able to send an enemy's projectile right back to them, or recover a thrown weapon, or fly into the sky from a falling rock. It freezing time to help you time your shot is also fantastic. That said, there is a certain magic to stasis that can't be replaced. Being able to freeze something, give it a series of whacks, and then just ride its momentum into the distance was so much fun. The availability of vehicles may invalidate it in some people's eyes, but it was such an iconic part of Breath of the Wild, especially for speedruns. And I miss it. Even with how little I use stasis in my own playthrough, I honestly want it back. Um, Gonna throw out here another interesting comment that, like, again, this dragon's path not going how I expected it. I thought that she went to, and I guess actually, like, I've seen her flying. I should have known that this is what she did. Well, I thought that the dragon's path was that she went to the Kakariko Tower and then Lunaru and then down to the Nakleta Tower. But no, she goes to Lunaru, then Nakleta, then the Sheikah one, just like Nidra does. Basically the same path. That's very interesting. Of course, with like Dinral and Faroche, she goes the opposite direction of those two. So she still, like, I guess technically hits the towers in the same order if you want to be technical. But it's weird that, like, this is the one that she just follows straight up. And they could have very easily done it a little bit reversed. That's kind of neat. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting us to be passing over Farron and Lake Hylia right now. Bombs and Fuse aren't a perfect comparison, but it's close enough. Oh, again, this is debatable, but I might lean Fuse. I think I lean Fuse. With how much it improved combat, I think I lean Fuse. Having infinite explosives to just chuck into camps of enemies was a delight, and aesthetically, they were just really pretty. That said, thanks to Fuse, bomb arrows, time bombs, and the cannons, you still bomb arrows are far cheaper in this game than in the original, and thanks to the throw mechanic, you can still sort of use the bomb runes. They don't work the exact same, but the end goal is still possible. So it's not super bad that we're missing them. Now, kind of how the circle and the square bombs were sort of considered the same rune in the original game. Most people consider Ultra Hand and Auto Build to be essentially the same ability here. But in case you do think that they are separate, Auto Build is pretty similar to the DLC Master Cycle ability. Now, though, you can summon basically any kind of vehicle and not just a motorcycle, making it viable in way more situations. Brief shout out to Amiibo. All of the Amiibo weapons, and hang on. I don't know if that I hit the mic or not. I had to burp there. That just came out of nowhere. Brief shout out to Amiibo. All of the Amiibo weapons and gear can be located in this game in the depths. I personally love this, as it makes the game less pay to win, if you will, and all content is available for all players. Though I could see some people not like it, as it would kind of invalidate having a decent Amiibo collection. IMO Amiibo are still useful in this game. Not only are there exclusive paraglider fabrics, but getting 600 rupee extra outfits to sell, or pristine versions of weapons you'd otherwise have to scour the depths for, is still a major help. They're still useful to have a lot of Amiibo. It's just non-Amiibo players aren't missing out on anything anymore. If there's any like Amiibo functionality that I will criticize a bit, it is the Midna and Wolf Amiibo. Like, I get it. Because of the 5 stages, you don't need another hand in the fight with Wolf Link. But even still, with how rare the Midna and Wolf Amiibo was, at least when the Breath of the Wild came out, I think it's a shame that she doesn't at least have an exclusive paraglider fabric. The fact that she's the only one with absolutely no paraglider fabric, let alone an exclusive one, is a tad insulting. While discussing the runes, we might as well discuss address the champion and sage abilities. The thing that made the champion abilities a tad rough is that you were only allowed 3 uses of them before they had to recharge. However, if you waited the entire recharge period without using them, they would not passively recharge. You'd have to use all 3 in order to get any of them back, which severely limited their application. You'd either run out of them mid-fight, or after a fight, go find somewhere to waste them. In addition, since they were bound to the same buttons you'd used for other things, you'd often accidentally activate them. Sages, on the other hand, are a mixed bag. The sages themselves are nice. Getting extra chip damage and distractions for enemies is a delight, as mentioned above. Although having all 5 of them out at once kind of crowds the screen. What gets annoying, though, is the sage abilities. You need to click on a sage in order to prep their ability, and then have a limited amount of time to use that ability before you have to re-prep it. During fights, the sages will run away from you, forcing you to chase them down in order to actually activate them, assuming that you can make them out in the crowd and find the one that you wanted. You could use Whistle to call a sage to you, but that causes them to all rush to your location, so you'll likely click the wrong one. Annoyingly, the second a fight ends and you don't need to activate them anymore, they'll rush into crowd around you, often leading to Tulin blowing away or Yonabo burning up all your loot as you try to pick it up. They get in the way more than the champions ever did. I'm gonna throw out a little bit of a side dialogue here. We're actually very close to Thunderhead here. I guess we're not super close, but we feel decently nearby it. That's kind of interesting. That's kind of neat. That's kind of cool. Actually, probably. Did you recharge? Or did it just back you? Oh, you did recharge, but I got the wrong thing. Oops. Oh well. All right, so that's the main gist of the sages and the champions. So let's compare them one by one. Tulin is by far and away the best sage, and is far better than Revali. Getting boosts mid-air is way more useful than just climbing up one section of a cliff, and makes this flight in this game decently fun. Revali is also largely replaceable in this game with things like pine cones and rocket shields. Since Tulin will stay right by your side whenever you are mid-air... Wait, where was I? Since Tulin will stay right by your side whenever you're in mid-air, he's also the only sage you can consistently use when you want to. Credit to Revali, though. Holding jump made it so that you would never accidentally waste one of his charges, which is appreciated. The next most useful is Yanabo. The thing about Daruk's protection is that it was the worst of the champion abilities. It would oh shit, hold on. I got the sound off, so that almost really screwed me over there. But I caught it out of the corner of my eye. Probably should have considered that. I might also. At least for now. Because the Master Sword's going to be fine. But that bow might be inflammable. I don't know. Alright, so the thing about Daruk's protection is it was the worst of the champion's abilities. It would automatically kick in whenever you locked on or blocked, meaning it was very easy to waste it on things like a red Boko throwing a rock at you, instead of actually dangerous attacks like a silver Lionel swinging its sword. We might have actually just passed... Did we just... Yeah, I think we didn't get that close to Thunderhead, but I think that storm was the Thunderhead storm. That's kind of interesting. That we were actually kind of close there. But Druk's. Oh, come on, really? Just as I get rid of my bow and just as I start talking again. Any more? Hello? Nope, he's relaxed. Okay, we're fine. Can I read about Druk now? Anything else, game, you want to throw at me? Anything? Okay. Next most useful is Yanabo. The thing about Druk's protection is it was the worst of the champion's abilities. It would automatically kick in whenever you locked on or blocked, meaning it was very easy to waste it on things like a red Boko throwing a rock, instead of actually dangerous attacks like a silver Lionel swinging its sword. In addition, because of how the game calculated damage, it was nerfed by things like explosions. Because what? Sorry, I'm thrown off a bit. I have a typo here I didn't catch. Why does it say colding? Could-ing? Why could-ing is not a word? Why is that in my notes? What? All right. Well, in addition, because of how the game calculated damage, it was nerfed by things like explosion, counting the fire and blast as separate attacks, and using up 2 charges of the already quite limited 3. Denabo is better, but not by much. His ability is excellent for breaking through large rock walls like the Secret Passage or the like, blowing away massive amounts of rocks without wasting any durability or bomb flowers. The only issue being that these rock walls are often by rough terrain. I just lost my place again. The only issue being that these rock walls are often by rough terrain. Stepping over a slight edge will disable him. And whenever you let go of him, he tends to run the exact fucking opposite direction of where you're heading, instead of walking or TPing down to join you, where you were trying to use him. Being able to blast him off of builds you're driving is pretty fun and can be cheesed easily, but if you forget to disable him, it can be distracting when trying to go on a pretty scenic drive or when aiming a precise device. Okay, are we passing by Farosh right now? Oh, maybe we are. He's just behind, or she's just behind us. No, I think this is just a natural storm. I don't see the lightning dragon. I think this is an actual storm. Huh, that's kind of cool. Again, though, the path's not going quite as I expected. She's passing over the Great Plateau. That's kind of cool. I mean, I think she passes pretty close to the Great Sky on Lynch 2 in the sky. So going to its ground equivalent is like a nice touch. Appreciate that. And also the demon code bow doesn't bow. Bow doesn't bow. Doesn't burn. What the fuck am I talking about? This is picking up my actual voice, right? I haven't had it on game audio this entire time, have I? Okay, yeah, I know. Because the bar, I checked and the bar was going up when I started, but now I'm not so. But then I was like, is it actually? But okay, because that'd be annoying if I was doing this whole thing and what I just said came through. Next, let's tackle Riju and Urbosa. Urbosa's actually felt really well balanced in the original game. Because she was tied to charged attacks, accidentally using her was incredibly easy, especially when trying to stasis along things. Aside from that, she would deal massive damage, or aside from that, you know, the good thing instead is that she could deal massive damage that would basically do a third of every enemy's health. Do a third of basically every enemy's health. Combine that with the 3 charges and the 10 minutes, and then every 10 minutes, she'd combine that with 3 charges, and every 10 minutes, she would provide you with basically a free kill. A tad OP, but awesome. Riju, on the other hand, is annoying. When she deals extra damage to Queen Gibdo, that's about... While she does deal extra damage to Queen Gibdo, that's about her only use. it takes so long for her charge to reach the enemy that you're trying to hit that 9 times out of 10, you're better off just using a shock fruit since they're cheap and essentially have the exact same effect. Even with the Queen Gibdo fight, you have to be on the you have to be on the mobile. On the mobile? Is that a saying? I wrote that in my notes and it sounded like natural written down, but saying that out loud, that doesn't feel right. You have to be so mobile. That's what I wrote. Never mind. You have to be so mobile to not get hit that she runs away from you so much that it adds an unnecessary level of difficulty. A lot of people call the Queen Gibdo fight hard. I don't actually think it is that hard. It's just that the sages are hard to use, is the problem. Which then leads us to the worst of the stages and the best of the champions. Mipha's Grace was fucking awesome. A free heal plus yellow hearts whenever you died was great. And thanks to being on a 20-minute cooldown, it felt perfectly balanced, to the point where I actually disliked the DLC buffing it, unlike all the other ones. Sidon is, in comparison, just so awkward. His shield can protect you from any damage similar to Daruk. However, it only lasts until you attack. And if you have the time to run over to Sidon and activate the shield, you usually have enough time to just dodge the attack. The water stream is nice, as it's a ranged attack that deals your weapons full damage. However, it also costs durability, and similar to the Master Sword beams, is a bit harder to aim than an arrow. Water as a mechanic becomes largely useless after killing Muckrock. You can use it for cooling off in Gerudo, but an outfit or food is a more permanent solution. Perhaps the most useful part of this ability is getting wet to buff Zora weapons, but even then, constantly reapplying that wetness when he keeps running away from you mid-fight is annoying as hell. You're not back yet. Yeah, you're not back yet. I thought I'd check. Now we're going the reverse of Ferocious Path properly. Mineru is a much more interesting case, as she has no champion equivalent. And she's an odd one. Walking straight over Gloom is great. She can... Oh, it's pulsing. Okay, it's coming back. Where is it? No? There it is. Okay. Mineru is a much more interesting case, as she has no champion equivalent. And she's an odd one. Walking straight over Gloom is great. She can apparently break ore deposits with her bare hands, which is awesome. I was being way too annoying, constantly re-equipping hammers when we were trying to mine that zonite in the depths. I could have just used her fists. You can reach high up apples and butterfly. You can reach high up apples and butterflies on her back and get free bullet time, which is sweet. Mounting her, though, is awkward. Dismounting requires 2 button presses. And while that's nice to prevent you from accidentally dismounting, it gets in the way when you accidentally mounted and wanted off. Where Mineru falls apart is materials fused to her hands. Zonite devices don't last quite as long as when used to build a machine. And non-zonite materials only last for like 5 hits. Meaning that basically any material is better used for fusing to your weapons, to your own weapons. Constantly reapplying materials to your hands gets annoying fast, and she doesn't even provide that much extra damage with them and breaks them so fast, so quickly. Combine that with her typical speed being slower than Link's walking speed, and you're better off just slapping a beam emitter on the front of your motorcycle. A cool idea, but wholly too complicated, with such poor performance. But woefully too complicated with much too poor performance to feel practical. I've said it before, so I'll make it brief. The Master Sword sucks. In the base game, it's essentially its base damage is essentially the same as the first game: 30 normally and 60 when awoken. However, it now has 2 stages of awakening and will usually only go up to 45 instead of 60. The Master Sword beams still feel a tad pointless to me. In the original game, they would, or at least felt like they would, take longer to wind up than arrows. But you needed full health to use them. And that long windup usually left enough time for an enemy to ranged attack you and disable using it. Luckily, this game clapped back. Using the Tunic of Memories or the Champion's Letters, you can use the beam attack whenever, regardless of health. The most annoying bit about the Master Sword, though, by far, is its durability. The Master Sword gets 25 extra durability the very first time you fuse something to it, but only the first time. You'd think it would either always get the durability or never get it, and a 80 damage, 60 durability weapon would be nothing to scoff at. As it is, though, it's a tad shit. Thanks to Fuse, it can only pretty reliably get over 60 damage, so it's certainly better than it was in... thanks to Fuse, though, it can pretty reliably get over 60 damage, so it is certainly better than it was in Breath of the Wild, but for the legendary sword that seals the darkness, it just feels a tad mid. There are a few new suit and elixir effects in this game that are worth talking about. As mentioned earlier, slip resistance is one of the best additions to the game. Nothing to add there. Gloom is pretty inspired, letting you risk permanent loss of hearts to pass through a dangerous puddle, or applying them as you take damage is cool, with the only way to heal usually being to bail out of the depths. It forces you to really weigh your decisions on where to head and when to quit, and having foods that unbreak your hearts but don't actually heal them creates a fair counter. Gloom Resist, though, leaves a lot to be desired. The ability grants you 4 bonus hearts that tank gloom damage before your regular hearts are damaged, and then slowly heal those extra hearts back. The main problem is that these extra hearts only affect damage for standing in gloom, which usually isn't that big of a problem. There are enough empty spots or thin enough stretches that you only take about a heart or 2 of gloom damage anyway, from the stuff anyway. But it's enemies that deal 6 or more gloom hearts, even with max armor, that are the really scary threats, making extra hearts very niche. Alright, we might actually be able to finish the whole loop before I'm done with my review, funny enough. We're very close. Assuming that her Tabantha stretch isn't like super out of the way, but we've only got like 3-4 Skyview Towers to pass by left, so it's actually going better than I thought it was. But the 3 elemental attack ups are pretty shit. Even in an environment of the respective element, when in an environment of the respective element, they provide some sort of attack boost. This attack boost is not flat out percentage improvement like attack up, but an explosion of elemental energy after completing a charge attack or a combo. Problem 1 is that most of these environments deal damage to players themselves, so you'd have to double up armor and food of that elemental resist and attack up. Problem 2 is that most of the monsters you find in these environments are immune to that kind of elemental attack anyway. Problem 3 is that these appropriate elemental regions are actually rather rare, meaning that all 3 abilities combined only work for like a third of the map, if even that. You're better off just fusing an elemental Lizzlehorn to your weapon. It's way easier and more reliable. Gotta say, I love the Rising Island chain from this angle. It looks gorgeous. It looks a bit like clouds stretching up to the sides. I thought it was a cloud ridge that wasn't moving for a second, but no, that's the Rising Island chain. It looks cool from here. That's badass. Rupee peddling is interesting. I never used it, so I have no idea how good it is, but trading off money instead of hearts is a cool idea. From my understanding, it does have a limit, though, and after you lose a certain amount of money, it targets health again, which I think is a bit of a lame nerf. Let the rich cats take some hits. I think that'd be better. That brings us to Glow. Glow is perhaps the most useless ability in the entire game. Even a even a max 3 level version of the effect does not light up as much space as a basic ass bright bloom, meaning it doesn't really help with navigating the depths at all. Just like bright blooms, it becomes largely useless once the depths are explored. If tier 1 was as strong as tier 3 is now, and tier 3 was like more similar to a bright bloom, it would be a lot better, but still not useful. Oh yeah, and there's also the glide set, negates fall damage. That's cool. And the zone ice set lets your devices last longer, which can be handy. I have never better place to talk about this, but it's a bit fitting for the situation we're in right now. Riding dragons is neat. I like it. That's such a cool idea. It's so badass. They did not have to add in riding the dragons as a game functionality, but they did, and the game was so much better for it. I feel awesome every time. So I'd be remiss not to mention some of the content cut from the previous game. First off, there were a lot of random animals and materials that were cut, like the woolly rhino and the hardy durian, without much reason to do so. Most of them aren't that missed in the gameplay, but the fact that they were cut at all is certainly odd. More interestingly are all the cut weapons. There were a ton of cool weapons in the original game that just aren't here anymore, like the Demon Carver or the Drill Shaft. Now, I think there were a lot of reasons that the weapon count was scaled back. Thanks to the fuse mechanic, you can change the special effects of a weapon on the whim, defeating the purpose of iron hammers, woodcutter axes, or elemental blades. Fuse can buff the attack power of any weapon, so having high damage tools like the Lionel Crusher would be largely pointless, as you have alternate methods to reach those attack values. And if they were still in the game, your attack damage could get OP very easily. Weapon sets now have special effects, such as soldiers' weapons having quicker charge attacks, or Royal Guard weapons dealing extra damage as they're about to break. Such effects even the playing field for the different weapon types, justifying alternate weapon variants and encouraging new playstyles. Coming up with a new weapon mechanic for every single random sword may have been a tad difficult, and could have made too many of them feel unfairly shit or repetitive. She's almost back. She's almost ready again. Pristine weapons also raise issues. There aren't that many points to get clean weapons in the depths. Adding too many weapons with both tarnished and pristine versions would bloat the Hyrule Compendium and make getting the weapon that you want from one of those spirits in the depths even more difficult. That said, I don't care if a Royal Claymore fused to a Flame Gleeok horn is essentially the same thing. I miss my great Flame Blade Tails. I miss her so much. And she should be recharging here pretty quick. I don't wait for her to recharge before we start the... Because... If she's not... Is she really not? Come on. It's about time for it. Oh, you are? Okay. Just the glow wasn't as intense as I remember. Alright. And to wrap things up... Shit, where did it... And to wrap things off, I talked a bit about ultra-handed building things earlier on, so I feel like it's worth talking about some of the Zonai devices and my thoughts on them. The steering stick really sells any Zonai device. Being able to actually control where your vehicle is going and what it is doing is way better than letting it run on its own. One thing I was really worried about when first experimenting with Ultra Hand was how you'd have enough materials to add steering rotation to the front wheels, but you don't have to. With the steering stick, you can engage gaming logic and just turn whenever and regardless of however your vehicle is built. Carts and sleds are very similar. Both are just... carts and sleds are very similar to each other, I should say. Both are just simple, effective ways to head downhill or a simple chassis. The cart especially helps with getting wings off the ground and is very handy. Hover stones are pretty nice, especially given that you can attach them to arrows, and leave them midair, that's just great. And Ascension allows you to reach them very easily. An excellent way to recharge stamina, or reach bullet time, or even just easy climbing and carrying things up and downhill. Stakes are a bit whack. I feel like the way they stab into things can be a bit awkward. My biggest gripe with them, though, is that auto build ones can't be inserted into the ground until you make the build, which makes setting up machines with them awkward. But in general, they're useful for adding stability and climbing, so still appreciated. Both wheels are to be expected and work just fine. As far as I can tell, small wheels move faster than big wheels, uh, and big wheels can climb harsher terrain than the small wheels. So there's still a point to both of them, which is not. I'm going to read that again. The way I had it written down is better. As far as I can tell, small wheels move faster while big wheels can climb harsher terrain. So there is still a point to both of them, which is nice. Fans are pretty sweet. Blowing away enemies becomes a lot easier when you get Tulin, but they're an excellent multi-purpose propulsion method. Hover bikes, rafts, mine carts, when attached to wings or floating platforms, they're just such a cheap and easy way to push whatever you want and keep going, and I love them. Also free updraft. Rockets are an odd case. For builds and vehicles, they actually feel a tad pointless. They turn on automatically instead of you picking when to fire them, and adding extras of them doesn't actually add any height. However, when you haven't upgraded your battery, they're much better than fans at getting builds off of the ground. When fused to a shield, they're just absolutely OP. Free climbing, free bullet time, they're great. They completely fixed the shields and having so many like slots for shields for me. I actually use my shields in this game now. I never use them like this, but they also act like keys wings and let your arrows fly further when you attach a rocket to them, which is a pretty useful use for them. Springs are okay. 9 times out of 10, they're just worst rockets, but they're pretty goofy and funny to experiment with, and unlike rockets, can be reused. And then there's wings. Dear God, how did the wings turn out to be so shit? The thing about wings is that they have a 1.5-minute timer before they run out. Unlike every other Zonai device, that's a whole 30 minutes. And 30 minutes is more than you're probably going to use them for. The main purpose of wings is to glide to a certain location, but they can barely get to a neighboring sky island, if you can at all. Once you have max stamina and Tulin, you can more or less get further than a wing would allow. And once you get max battery, a hover bike goes further and faster. Now, I've heard that the timing is likely a balancing. Now, I've heard that the timer is likely a balancing mechanic, so that players can't cheese the game and glide absolutely anywhere at the very start. But there's a really simple fix to that. Just tie the time a wing lasts to your max battery. That way, they'd actually be remotely viable in the late game. But that's not where the pain ends. The controls of them seem a bit awkward. They're physics-based, so they make sense, but it takes a lot of experimenting to learn how to move them while just standing on them. And by the time you've figured it out, you're largely past the need for them. Steering sticks don't help much, as it feels like the wing trying to balance itself out and start gliding again often fights directly against you. Attached devices, of course, throw off the flight path, and all of that makes attached devices, of course, throw off their flight path. All of that makes using them effectively a massive learning ball ache that isn't worth it when 2 fans and a steering stick outclasses them every time. Oh, is the, oh, I, is the, okay? Because I thought she came into Looking Landing from this angle, so I guess she actually goes. Even though she went out to Hyrule Field while passing by Death Mountain, I don't think she actually got to look near the Lookout Landing Tower that close to it. So I think now is actually the time we're going to Lookout Landing. Okay. Not what I was expecting, but fair enough. One pro I'll give to wings, though, is that you can just chill. Just stand on them, and they'll move to your destination for you. That's pretty nice. Balloons comparatively aren't as bad. While they also have a 1.5-minute timer, I don't think it's nearly as detrimental in their case. You'll mainly use balloons for going. You'll mainly use balloons to go straight up, and 90% of the time you only need to go up for like a minute anyway, so it's fine. From a game design perspective, I can see an objective reason to prevent them from. I can see an objective reason to prevent them from going up indefinitely. If anyone's ever tried it, you'll notice that climbing out of a chasm causes way more lag than diving down it. And the game does have a ceiling box that can break your immersion if you run into it. I feel like something that just casually sends you straight up forever would make both of those quirks way more obvious. Then we get to the fun shit. The emitters are excellent. Flame, frost, and shock emitters are all fantastic for the same reasons their elemental effects are fantastic. Wouldn't change a thing. Beam emitters are slightly more awkward. When you yourself are using them or have attached them to a device, they're pretty great. But one place they really pale is Mineru. The beam emitter is only really effective when focused and locked onto a target. And while Mineru uses the other emitters decently, she only ever seems to tap the beam. I only think I've seen her actually hit her target like once. Hydrants and cannons are basically emitters in their own right. Cannons fused to a weapon are effectively infinite short-range bomb arrows, which are great for mining, and I regret not using them. I didn't know about them for, like, I think my entire playthrough. Hydrants are a lot more niche. Again, if Muck remained on the map after killing Muckrock, they'd be great, but as is, they're sort of limited. Combined with a shock emitter, they're awesome for combat, and they can help keep Link cool in hot regions, which could theoretically help you stack more status effects in Gerudo and the Elven Depths. But aside from that, they don't do much. Homing carts and construct heads are both awesome. Having something that will automatically target your enemies makes the previously mentioned emitters way more viable on any machine. And the carts are really adorable. And yet there is a level of balancing to them. The carts are a tad slow and don't deal too much damage on their own. I almost said don't. What the hell? And don't deal too much damage on their own. And the heads don't give a shit. If you're in the way of their target, they'll just shoot anyway, which adds a great comedic value to the game. Aside from that auto build test and first encountering them, I don't think there's a single time I used time bombs. They're basically just another bomb flower in the grand scheme of things, but I just didn't really bother. There's not many instances where waiting to explode your enemy is better than just instantly blowing them up. And incorporating them into a build can take a lot of engineering. Portable pots honestly get a bad rep. As with most people, I initially wrote them off because you could only get one. Cook out of them. That's ridiculous. 90% of the time, you're better off just warping to a stable, cooking an inventory of dishes, and warping back. Still, I found myself tossing them out for quick attack up dishes for Lionel fights when I forgot all of the time. And they work in the rain, unlike regular cooking pots. While expensive, they are a great emergency measure for quick cold resist or slip resist when out in the wilds and you forgot your prep or took longer than expected. Alright. She's at it forever now. We're actually gonna pass, like, basically straight over the Forgotten Temple. That's kind of interesting. Okay. I'm still pissed about stabilizers. I'm never going to live it down. It is so dumb that you have to activate them. How the hell does that work? IRL stabilizers like that are just things with very heavy bottoms and light tops, so they just bounce back into position. They are completely controlled by gravity. Every other physics-based Zonai device, like wings, mirrors, carts, or sleds, require no power, which makes sense. Every moving or firing device, like wheels, fans, and emitters, require power, which makes sense. There are two devices that I'd say defy physics. Stakes debatably defy physics by phasing into terrain and don't require any power to do so. However, there's no real movement involved with the stake once it is inserted, and if it wasn't phasing into the wall and instead stabbed into it, it wouldn't be defying physics. So it's a bit of an edge case. Hoverstones completely defy physics by turning off gravity, so they need power to turn gravity off. Stabilizers, for some fucking reason, require power to turn gravity on. Why? That doesn't make any sense. How does a charge make its ass heavier? I'm also going to throw shade and the game. I'm also going to throw shade at the game's way of tutorializing them. As far as I recall, the only place you encounter stabilizers in the wild is on Yiga vehicles, where they activate alongside the rest of the vehicle automatically. There's only 2 or 3 shrines that have stabilizers, one of which is its tutorial shrine, an upright device. Now, as far as I remember, in every other tutorial shrine, the device starts off turned off, and you as the player are prompted to experiment to figure out what to use them for, with an obvious puzzle right in front of you. But in an upright device shrine, the stabilizer starts out turned on. It's already upright and supporting the ladder to climb to the next section. But from then on, all the rest of the shrine are turned off. All the rest in the shrine are turned off. The player would walk in, wonder why the device isn't standing. A much better tutorial would be to have the stabilizer linked to the ladder and turned off to begin with. The player would walk in, wonder why the device isn't standing upright like the shrine's title said it would, and then experiment to get it upright. As is, the shrine is set up so the player never learns how the device actually works in the first room. And then in all later rooms, they wonder why it stopped working. As for the actual function, though, yeah, it's pretty good. Having something that keeps your vehicle always standing upright, that's pretty cool. Approve of that. Approve of that. Approve of that. Nice little star fragment landing right in front of us. Yeah, not really flying directly over the Forgotten Temple, but hey, it's within sight, so that's kind of cool. Then we get on to batteries and big batteries. And their situation is a bit odd. Regular batteries are 100% amazing. At the cost of a little extra weight, you can make your vehicle last way longer than it would with your personal battery. The big battery is comparatively odd. Now, I commented in my playthrough that it was strange. It was the only device that cost more to buy with crystallized charges, costing 10 times more than any other device. But it's apparently 28 times as powerful as a regular battery. So that's a fair price. However, they are incredibly rare in the overworld. As far as I know, you can only get them as chest loot or rare drops from Flux Construct 3s. I couldn't find any. As far as I know, you can only get them as chest loot or rare drops from Flux Construct 3s. I couldn't find any exact times for how long big batteries last, but it looks like it's about 1.75 times as long as your max battery, or something close to that. I do have to wonder how often you're actually going to need that much battery power. In the early game, it would be handy, but in the late game, a maxed battery, especially combined with the Zonai set, is long enough to do just about everything I wanted to do. But if you're going to try and fly a vehicle or if you're going to try and fly or drive constantly across the entire map, now I could see it being helpful. It just feels like it's a bit overkill. And then we get to the two most useless devices in the entire game. Everything else here is either good or has some interesting use cases, but these two ones just feel like you could cut out of the game and it would change nothing. Lights are kind of pointless. They use up battery power to illuminate your surroundings, but don't light up things as well as bright bloom seeds. Bright blooms don't cost power, bright blooms are easier to get, and bright blooms can be properly attached to vehicles and recreated with auto build. So this easy to max out early game plant outclasses them in every regard. To make matters worse, like half of the auto build schemes you get from the Yiga have lights attached. And since they're useless on the surface or a lit up depths, in the late game, they just kind of artificially inflate the price of whatever you're building. Mirrors are better, but only slightly. Mirrors are only really used for lighting up those light puzzle panels or killing Gibdos. The former is confined to the Gerudo questline, like 3 Sky Islands and the 8th Heroine. The latter are found all over, but mirrors only kill Gibdos when reflecting sunlight, meaning they're only really usable before and during the Lighting Temple, and becomes pointless after that questline. The thing is, all of these locations come with a surplus of mirrors in their own right, which raises the question: why bother making mirrors a Zonai device in the first place? You never need to pull one out of your pocket or use them after beating those puzzles. Other puzzle-exclusive things like that floating rubbery platform or the giant fan that needs electricity could have been fun to experiment with in the overworld, but aren't given the same luxury. You need Pelison shenanigans to get them to use more. You need Pelison shenanigans to get to use them in the overworld. / surface, whatever you want to call it. But I have one easy solution to make both things way better. Make it so that lights shown on a mirror in the depths count as natural sunlight, and let them do damage to Gibdos. That way, lights have an actual purpose, and mirrors have a reason to be in your pocket 24/7. Now, some people may complain that would let you cheese the Lighting Temple with light. That would let you cheese the Lighting Temple with lights. But you can already cheese the Lighting Temple with Dazzle Fruit, and cheese the other temples with hover bikes anyway. So it doesn't really affect the game that much. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Tears of the Kingdom. I will say it was a very excellent and fun experience. I feel like if there's one thing that I would say about it, that you could take this as a positive, you could take this as a negative, depending on who you are. When I finished Breath of the Wild, I was really itching to go. I was really itching to continue, rather. I did not want to stop playing Breath of the Wild. After I 100%ed it, I was itching to either pick it up again or start Tears of the Kingdom. Throughout a pretty good chunk of Tears of the Kingdom, I was a bit bummed that there wasn't more story content to do, and I was wishing for more and wishing for some kind of DLC. And yeah, like the day after I finished playing the game and I finished doing all my look-back streams, I was antsing a bit to keep exploring the world of Hyrule, but stepping away from the game for like a week, wrote the script, stuck away for a week, and then came back to do a little spiel here. That just under a week away from it, I think I'm good. I'm no longer having these withdrawals and this itch to continue exploring the land of Hyrule, and fighting moblins and fighting Taloses and building hover bikes. I feel pretty satisfied now. I've calmed down over the Zelda addiction, if you will. Which, if they're not going to make any DLC or a third game, I guess is a good thing. That the game managed to satisfy me. But it also would be cool to play more. Again, I don't know if they're going to... I don't know if I'm going to do anything else for Zelda on this channel. I don't know if I'm going to do much on this channel at all. Um, I would like to, no promises. I would like to play through Ocarina and Majora and possibly Twilight Princess this year, just so that I'm caught back up with Zelda and I can properly experience the fandom that I've been away from since like middle school. Um, but I don't know whether or not I want to stream those. I feel like for Ocarina and Majora, they're short enough games that I could probably do actual recordings and then edit those recordings, which I think would be better than a live stream. But I also don't know if I'm even going to end up doing that. I felt like Breath of the Wild was a very special thing that like I had managed to be so spoiler free for such a popular and beloved game. I finally feel like it was worth catching my experience like with that one. But for like Tears of the Kingdom, like it was only out for like half a year by the time I started. There's still lots of people that have not finished this game. So like my first experience and impressions of it aren't as important. So I might play other Zelda games, live stream or upload videos for other Zelda games on this channel at some point in the future, but no promises. We're probably done here for a pretty good while. Now, our hero's journey is almost complete, or our ride on the Light Dragon is almost complete. We were like on like the border of Lunario and the Typhlo ruins when we jumped on her, and we're about to like pitch and go around Hebra rather. So I think I'll just kind of let it play out. I'll see if I can think of anything else to talk about, because it's probably going to be another 10, 15, maybe 20, I think just 10 minutes before her path links back up to where it was before. So I don't know if I have really anything else to discuss. I guess I could throw in little things that I didn't feel like were like super worth my main review because they were such minor and side things. But since I went on the rant about the Midna amiibo, I'll bring it up again. Since I went on such a rant about the Midna amiibo, I think I'll bring it up again, that it is a little bit weird that the 3 Smash Bros. Links have duplicate paraglider fabrics as some of the other like default Link amiibo, but then Smash Bros. Sheik and Smash Bros. Ganondorf were given unique paragliders. That's definitely an interesting case. Again, they said that they weren't going to do DLC, but I feel like adding in 4 new paraglider fabrics would not be that big of an ask in the grand scheme of things. Just 4 new textures would not be that taxing on Nintendo. They could definitely handle that. So if there is DLC, that's what I'm hoping for. And if they release new Zelda amiibo paraglider fabrics for those, would also be awesome. But I'm not really holding my breath for that, because I mean, I think they'd probably have to announce a new game or a new remake of a game before we get any more Zelda amiibo. Because, like, I can't really think of anything else from this game that warrants an amiibo. Not really. And they've got most of the older games decently covered. I don't know, maybe one of, like, an actual Ganon. The sort of fat, more bluish than green pig from, like, the original game. That might be cool as an amiibo, now that I think about it. Actually, you know what, the Majora's Mask amiibo. Link didn't have the Majora's Mask in the Majora Mask amiibo. He had, like, the Goron Mask. So Skull Kid with Majora's Mask, that could be a cool one, too. But I doubt they're going to do... Actually, they might do a remake of the original Zelda sometime soon. But they're probably going to do a remake or remaster of Majora's Mask for some time. I don't think that's on the table. So yeah, I can't really think about a much situation where they would add in or they would release any new Zelda amiibo this year. And if there's no new amiibo this year, there's not much reason to add post-game, post-release content back to Tears of the Kingdom. There have been rumors. Now, I do wanna like make it clear they're just rumors. That Gleeok is scaring me. I'm pretty sure out of its range, but it's still spooking me. There are rumors that a new Nintendo console might be coming out this year. Oh, and I thought for a second we were going around the whole mountain range, but no, we are like passing through like the gorge. Also, the dragon passed over the Dueling Peaks a little bit earlier. That's interesting because the Dueling Peaks were said to be split by a dragon. The Dueling Peaks were not split in the flashbacks with Zelda. That's probably means something. I was thinking, oh yeah, rumors have been circulating a lot now that there was going to be a new Nintendo console this year, and I kept like writing that off of, oh, there's no way they would do it. They still have so many plans for the Switch. But then I remembered, oh wait, no. Those plans I was thinking of were 2 more years of DLC for Mario Kart. And those DLCs have all come out now. The last 2 years have just flown by. It's like, oh no, yeah, this was about the point we were expecting the life cycle of the Switch to end. Because I mean, 2017 was a long time ago. Like 7 years, 6 years. I'm bad with math, and then I guess it also depends on whether it released early 2017 or late 2017. I can't remember. But yeah, like 6-7 years is like a longer run than a lot of consoles get. Most of them only last for like 3 or 4. The Switch has been out for a while, and it was already, this is typically the case with Nintendo consoles, but it was already performance-wise like behind its competitors when it came out. The main reason that people play Nintendo games is because the games themselves are fun. Things like the Xbox and the PlayStation may have like good hardware, but damn if their gameplay doesn't get like boring and repetitive after a couple of games. So it is probably about time that Nintendo moves on to their next thing. But I don't know what that next thing could be. Because like the transition from the Wii to the Wii U, that was so awkward. Partially because the Wii U was advertised so shittily, but like no one cared about the Wii U. And I've heard a lot of people calling it the Switch 2. I hope that that's not anywhere close to the official name that Nintendo comes up with. Because if you had the Switch OLED, and the Switch Lite that were all essentially the same console that ran the same games, then if you made like a Switch U, people are just going to assume it's another upgrade of the Switch and not a whole new console, and they're not going to get it, which would be the same problem with the Wii U all over again. But I imagine they won't fall for that mistake twice. But regardless of what they call it, there's been rumors that a Switch 2 is coming out this year, which I feel like it's probably going to be announced this year. I don't know if it'll come out this year. It could work for like a holiday release, but I feel like we probably would have seen more leaks. Oh, there's the fire outside of Selmy Spot. I thought that was a flame gluoc for a second. I was like, how the fuck is a flame gluoc here? But no, it's just outside Selmy Spot. We probably could have seen the king gluoc one of these times if we really paid attention too. Oops. But I don't know if it's going to release this year. And like the big thing that people are debating is like, okay, will there be a Zelda title as a launch for the Switch 2? Because Breath of the Wild was a send-off for the Wii U and a launch title for the Switch. It was kind of like one of like the big things that make Breath of the Wild so cool for a lot of people. And so I could totally see them. And so a lot of people are like suggesting, okay, what if there is a Zelda game as a launch title for the Switch? And I really doubt that that's going to happen. The only way that I think we'll get Zelda Year 1 on the Switch's replacement is one, which is the reason that I'm talking about this in the first place, is a Tears of the Kingdom re-release, remaster, probably not the right word, definitive edition, whatever have you. Just like put a slightly improved version of Tears of the Kingdom on the Switch's successor, which they could totally do. I think as is, there's not much that they could add with only a year's worth of development to justify a definitive edition on the Switch 2. But if they do make paid DLCs for the Switch version of Tears of the Kingdom, and then release the full game and those DLCs for free on the Switch's sequel, that would be a little bit annoying because people that already bought the DLCs would feel ripped off and miffed a bit, but like I could see it happening. The other thing could be a remake or a remaster of an older Zelda game. They love doing that. Again, I was about to say that Link's Awakening's remake was not that long ago, but I think it was actually like 2019, wasn't it? So it has been a decent bit since they did a high-definition remake or complete remaster of a Zelda game. And so they could totally either throw a bunch of remakes onto the Switch as like a send-off or throw a bunch of them onto the Switch's replacement as a welcoming in thing. As a welcoming title. I did play, in between playing Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I did play Link's Awakening, and it was cool going back to a more classic Zelda experience. Of course, being 3D now instead of 2D, technically 3D now instead of 2D, the movement was a lot less clunky than the original game. You could, the joystick was a lot better than just like a D-pad. But aside from that, it stuck pretty well to the gameplay of classic Zeldas. And so I think it would be cool to see the original couple of Zelda remastered in a similar style, just to make them more accessible. Aside from that, though, I don't know if a proper HD remake makes sense for many of the Zeldas, because basically every 3D Zelda has had an HD remake at this point. I feel like the only ones who could really like throw a caveat and a technicality for that would be Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, because they were both so for Wind Waker and Skyward Sword, they both for Wind Waker and Skyward Sword, they both got actual HD remakes, which I don't think changed that much about the game. If I'm being totally honest, I think, especially in Wind Waker's case, those games already looked good enough that their HD remakes barely changed anything. And so I think those two are still probably like fine. You wouldn't have to change them at all. You could just port them onto the new system, which would be great. For Twilight Princess, its HD remake is like a more noticeable like jump in like quality of like models and textures. But unlike those other two, I think that it has started to become dated at this point, which is weird because I'm pretty sure it came after those other two's HD remakes. So I could see an HD remake of Twilight Princess happening. But I think like something that would be a lot cooler would be Ocarina of Time of Majora's Mask, because those two games did technically get remakes, but they were remakes for the DS, and so they were still a bit bloxy and like clunky, like they were on the 64. And so I think it would be just kind of cool to like see those games remastered in a style that is more akin to the game manuals that they put out around the game, the artwork that they had around the game. You know what it's supposed to look like, as opposed to the a bit of like a boxy and what's the word, a polygon heavy designs of the original titles. I think that it might be cool to see those ones reimagined. Although that would also be a lot of work. So if they haven't already started on something like that, that's probably not going to happen in the next year or two. But like, I'm sure something Zelda could come with the Switch 2, but so close off the heels of the Tears of the Kingdom, I don't think it's really needed. I think the Zelda fan base is like eating good right now. Another thing is Age of Calamity. Oh wow, you do pass really close to that combat arena. This is probably a way to. Oh, I know you have a shrine up there, right up there. Anyway, never mind. Age of Calamity is another one that like I think I would like to get into that and live stream that one just so I've got like, the whole like Breath of the Wild set done. But its gameplay, as far as I know, is a lot different than either of these two games, and so it might not be as enjoyable of an experience for me. But I don't know, it might still be fine. So yeah, there you go. That's the Light Dragon's Path. You can't really see it that well with all of the other things that I have on my hero's journey, but it's still there. Thank you, Zelda, for the ride. Appreciated it. Surprised I actually managed to fill all that time talking about things. But I think we're going to call it there. It's probably going to be, well, it might not be my last. I might come back if I get all the amiibo for Paraglider fragments, but presumably this is going to be the last video on Tears of the Kingdom. So thanks for tuning in, and bye-bye.